All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for all of you that are here in the room, and also thank you for everyone virtually that's attending. My name is Jerome Jose Sanders, and today I will be talking about the imperative for inclusive innovation. In this talk, you'll hear me talk about Cisco's legacy and why that's important for our future, the social justice journey that Cisco has been on, and how we all can play a part in that, how we go from policy to practice when it comes to inclusive innovation. And then I'll give several examples of what happens in the world when inclusive innovation goes wrong, and what a future could look like when we get it right. And then finally, I'll leave you with some resources, and if we have some time, we can answer some questions. As always, I like to ask folks, please come as you are. I want to create an environment where we all feel safe and have an environment of trust. So with that being said, today I may cover some things that may be triggering or use some words that may seem harmful, but please know that they are for educational purposes. But at any point, if you do feel uncomfortable, feel free to exit or disconnect online, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation after. But the key here is please come as you are. A little bit about myself. So I'm originally from California, and I moved to North Carolina almost 8 years ago, and I've been with Cisco for 8 years, where I'm loving my time here at the company, and I do business strategy, community development, communications, operations, and at Cisco you wear a lot of hats, as I'm sure we all know within this community. If we're not wearing multiple, then what are we doing? Outside of work, I am a chairman of a nonprofit called First Tech Fund, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that's all about helping underserved youth in New York City and helping bridge that digital divide. And we all know how important the internet is towards the future for the future generations. I also serve as a liaison between the United Nations Global Compact and Cisco, where we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and how we can fundamentally use corporate resources not only to do good for communities, but also drive profitability. And finally, when I'm not doing these things, I'm training for an up-and-coming Ironman as a triathlete, so you can catch me running, swimming, or in the back roads of North Carolina riding my bike. So let's start with Cisco's heritage and legacy. And it all started in 1984 with two computer scientists at Stanford University, Sandy Lerner and Len Bozak. They were madly in love, and Cisco's story is all about love, and they had this deep desire to connect across campus. So what did Sandy and Len do? They created the first multi-protocol router, which is now the infrastructure and the backbone of the internet that we know and love today. Almost 38 years later, Cisco still has the legacy of maintaining over 70% of the world's internet. And according to Cisco's Internet Annual Report, by 2023, 5.3 billion global internet users will be online. Each person will have roughly 3.6 devices on their person, and finally, 110 megabytes will be the global fixed broadband speed. So what does this all mean? This means that there will be more people connected to the internet, there will be more devices, and finally, the internet will move even faster. And that is why Cisco and many other companies have to do the right thing to ensure that there isn't bias that's creeping into our code, that we're being ethical, and that we're being inclusive for all. As I mentioned, Cisco's been on a social justice journey of its own, and it's really serving as a catalyst for a future and a catalyst for change. And over the last couple of years, we saw excuse me one second. This didn't happen when I practiced it. We saw the senseless murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, and many, many more. And Cisco's leadership team took a stand, and they say, we support the Black Lives Matter, and the people within this community matter. And more importantly, how can we take a stand, and how can we take action? So over the last couple of years, Cisco's been on this journey where we've been honest, transparent, and true about what the Black experience is like. And more importantly, within these technical and engineering spaces, how can we implement changes that fundamentally affect the way that employees experience the technology, ranging from legal, from engineering, and many others. And so Cisco created 12 social justice actions where we are taking a stand and we're measuring almost on an annual basis how we're making those changes. And we've also included policy within our company that affect human rights. By now, I hope you can see that Cisco's all about powering an inclusive future for all. And if you're interested in seeing the other 11 social justice actions that are a part of our policy, please feel free to scan the QR code. But today I'll be focused on Social Justice Action 12, which is all about human rights and tech solutions. And we think about that in three ways. First, human rights by design. So how do we advise and train folks to think about human rights when it comes to the product development? Secondly, how do we make our technologies accessible so that all folks can experience technology in the way that they're intended? And finally, inclusive naming. How do we implement policy, as I've just shared, so that people know that this is a standard across the board? How do we build employee awareness both inside and outside of our Cisco walls so that we start to care deeply about this topic? And how do we drive compliance in the industry? And how do we engage in a community, much like what we're doing here, in an open source way where we can share best practices and share what's working well and what's not? And then finally, how can we integrate this into our culture so that many years from now, we don't have to have this conversation and talk about why inclusive innovation matters? So at Cisco, we are very keen on every single word that we use. And what you'll find is that an inclusive future starts with the inclusive language that we use. And we've established a policy within our company where we're tracking these very four harmful words that are either showing hierarchy or superiority. So we are looking to remove master, slave, whitelist, and blacklist. And on the right, you can see some of the words that we're looking to replace that. And that's across code, that's across our marketing, and all kinds of materials. And if you're interested in some other language that we're exploring, again, please feel free to check out this QR code. And we're also mindful in the fact that some of the code that we've already established has some of these words, and if we do break them, they could break the infrastructure. So we are very intentional about how we audit and what we touch and what we don't. Now let's take a moment and look at what happens when we get inclusive innovation wrong. And here I've provided 4 different examples of what we've seen over the last couple of years that have impacted the way that we experience our communities. The Apple Card had allegations against them because of gender bias. And there was an example of a husband that received almost 20 times the credit limit as his wife. And in fact, her credit score was higher. So why is that? Secondly, biased mortgage lending practices were also keeping people of color out of their homes. And then when it comes to hiring practices, we heard a little bit about that earlier and why that's so important to get right. But think about as companies really start leveraging algorithms to start making some of these very human decisions and how that can go wrong very fast. And in fact, this disproportionately has been affecting communities with disabilities. And then finally, within the healthcare system, there's still a lot of room for growth when it comes to using algorithms, because there are some algorithms out there that are already counting out Black patients because the algorithm is saying what they can and cannot pay for, and that needs to change. So now, let me give you a glimpse of hope as to what we can expect for the future. So within Cisco, we have a technology that we're very proud of called WebEx, which is one of our collaboration tools. And we're taking a close look at how we think about responsible artificial intelligence and machine learning. How do we train that data? And how do we create a product where it's not just about feature by feature, but how do we create this human and holistic experience that we've been hearing about all afternoon? And in the spirit of being transparent, we also know that we have quite a bit of work to do. And we've been questioning, how do we get more of that intersectional feedback from the end user who may look different, who may speak different, who may have a darker skin tone? And that's a journey that we're still on. But in the meantime, there's two features that I like to highlight. One is noise removal with the technology that we call Babel Labs. And at the start of using this tech, it didn't detect higher pitched voices. And as you can imagine, that's a huge problem. And we had to introduce new data sets that included those higher pitched voices. And one that's near and dear to me are virtual backgrounds. And as someone who has darker skin and who once upon a time had long, luscious, coily hair, this technology didn't work well for me at the start. So it affected the way that I experienced that tech. So what we did is we added more hair textures, darker skin tones. We added more lighting conditions to make it more human and more equitable. Next up, I'd like to show you a demo of a proof of concept that we have within WebEx that hasn't launched or anything like that, but just, again, just to give you a sense of what accessibility within collaboration could look like when we get this right.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for your time here. The thing that I want to talk about today is how we return laptops. So recently I got an email, and I think all of you kind of experienced this once or twice in your tenure here at Cisco. Got an email that they wanted my laptop back. And,
Felix is a white male in his 30s with dark blonde hair, round glasses, and a beard.
But they actually didn't. And then just yesterday, I received an email that they're going to buy out my laptop.
Felix is in an office with bookshelves, 3 plants, and a small globe lamp.
Even then, they didn't send me that label. So I reached out to them, and it's like, wow, you know, this laptop's so old.
Felix is holding up a laptop.
By now, they probably really want it back like this, I guess. So I don't know, what's your experience with?
So I'll pause it here and just really quickly highlight what you just saw, which was a human experience. So first, you saw Felix self-identify how he wants someone who's visually impaired to see him. Secondly, there was an algorithm that detected what was in Felix's background, and it also described who he was. And then as he picked up that laptop, you heard the algorithm actually describe what Felix was holding up. So just imagine the possibilities and the different technologies that we can develop when we have the end users in mind that come from all walks of life. And this is part of the secret sauce. We heard about affinity groups earlier and why they're important, and ERGs, and we call them employee resource organizations at Cisco. And I'm proud that we have a plethora of them, and they all play a role in prototyping and developing new technologies. And in fact, we've created an inclusive innovation council where many of the leads within this group are actually giving us feedback. And they're also helping us identify the different gaps within our technology. So before we release them, they can say, hey, this actually doesn't work well for me, and these are the reasons why. This is something that I highly encourage everyone in this room, whether you're your own business, an entrepreneur, a technologist, an advocate, think about how you can tap into a community of folks that look different, that think different, and that can bring different perspectives. Another piece that I am very passionate about is sponsorship. And I have to believe that everyone in this room had some sponsor that brought them into the seats that they're in or in the virtual setting that you're in as well. And I wouldn't have been here without my sponsor, Molly Das, speaking in front of all of you. There's a fact that 23% of people who have a sponsor are more likely to advance in their career than those that aren't. And on the right, 1 in 5 Caucasian men have a sponsor. 1 in 8 women have a sponsor. And 1 in 12 minorities have a sponsor. So it's obvious that this is a problem that we all have to play a role in improving. And that's why Cisco has created the multiplier effect that allows everyone in this room or online to take the pledge today, to pledge to someone and follow them throughout their career and plant that seed and ignite that spark that will help them open doors within their own careers, and communities. Now, how can you drive inclusive innovation? First, be very honest with yourselves, with your teams, with your engineers, in your documentation, in your code, and take a repository of the words that you're using. And track over time whether that's getting better or that's worse, and really start to question that data and that information, and ask why. Take a moment to reflect on your words that you use on a daily basis, and the words that we use with each other, and how can we make them better. And as you think about your role in your respective company and your respective industry, and the skills that you're developing to advance your work, look for those natural integration points where you can make inclusive innovation as part of your work. And then finally, if you need something tangible, the Linux Foundation has a plethora of resources on inclusive speaking and how to contribute open source best practices. And if that's not enough, Ann Gentle from our developer relations team, who is here in the audience, she has a GitHub repository where you can see what we're doing at Cisco and some of our best practices. So please do follow her. And we've also included a few other resources just in case you want to know a little bit more about different recommendations, public policy on inclusive naming, and other tools and rule sets. And if you're really excited about Cisco and you just want to join us, feel free to scan the QR code and join our Emerging Technology and Incubation group. And what I'll leave you with is, again, everyone in this room plays a role in driving inclusive innovation. And I hope that you've seen a few examples of how we can make this a better world for the next generation that's more diverse, that's more equitable, and that's more inclusive. Thank you.